game over. Yankees win. The Yankees win.
The windup and the pitch. Montero drives one in the air. Deep right field. It's got a chance. Grand slam. Grand slam, Miguel Montero. Cubs lead 7-3.
Scored by the first down at the 14. Montgomery back in, and here's Montgomery breaking a couple of tackles and winds up with a first down and a touchdown. Up the middle, Zibanejad. He goes to the net. He scores! He scores! The Rangers win! Mika Zibanejad with 5 goals!
Home run! Number 3 of the night for Robinson Cano!
So a lot of people ask me, Dylan, why do you love prospects so much? Well, frankly, my teams aren't the best. So you have to look for something in the fine lines of looking towards the future, if you will. And that's what we have laid out for today. A huge NBA draft breakdown, mock draft picks, all that stuff. It's been a while since we've done a full NBA episode. Honestly, I don't think we have. But before we get into that, we just want to talk about the news. The Giants finally won a football game. Swig, what did you like out of the G-Men on Sunday?
Well, I mean, if we could play Washington every week, maybe we wouldn't suck so bad. Both of the Giants' wins this season came over them. I like that the Giants won the turnover battle. 0 turnovers for the Giants in this game. Only the second game Jones has ever played that he did not turn the ball over, both of them against Washington. And Washington turned the ball over 5 times. It was just enough for the Giants to hold on. And the running game was also a big improvement. We saw a very nice combination of Gallman and Alfred Morris throughout most of the game, and both of them looked very good.
Yeah, Alfred Morris playing his old team there in Washington, and Daniel Jones is now 4-0 against Washington, and he's 1-15 against everybody else. Of course, his one win being his first start against Tampa Bay. So if he could play Washington every single game, it seems like the Giants would be 16-0, and Daniel Jones would be hosting up an MVP trophy.
Might be a slight exaggeration there, but he's definitely had more success against Washington than everyone else. The Giants played a very, very nice first half in particular, but the second half we started to see some of the cracks show as Washington really started to get some over and crossing routes going in the passing game. Kyle Allen getting hurt in the second quarter, I believe. Alex Smith finished it off. Frankly, I don't think it made too much of a difference. They were both making some plays against the Giants defense, but Jabril Peppers and Logan Ryan, who both played very well overall, came up with interceptions in the fourth quarter within the last 4 minutes or so of the game, and Logan Ryan's interception sealed it. So the Giants, miraculously enough, are only about a game and a half out of first place in the NFC East, and they play the Eagles next week, so we'll see what happens.
Because the defense got 5 turnovers in that game. That's huge for the defense, and it's hard to believe that the Giants are still in the running for first place after all these things. We mentioned how if they had a different quarterback, they might be 500 right now, which would put them way ahead in first place. But, I mean, this is insane how this Giants team is still sticking around. The defense has been really good. The offense has been up and down. If you can get consistency from the quarterback position, I think they could be solid.
Well, that's going to be a big if. The Giants' opportunity is very here if they're by some miracle going to contend, which I still don't think they are contenders here. They have to beat Philadelphia next week. They just have to. After that, there's a bye week and Cincinnati. You might be able to call those winnable games, but after that, the schedule gets a lot tougher with Seattle, Baltimore, Cleveland, Arizona, all still on the schedule, and the Giants aren't exactly going to sweep those games. Let's be realistic here. So if they're going to have any chance, they have to beat Philadelphia and Cincinnati the next couple of weeks.
Sticking with the news here, we're going to talk about news that probably isn't much news anymore, but we haven't gotten our take on it. Tony La Russa is now the White Sox skipper. You heard Tim Anderson say he's not going to change what he's going to do. He's still going to bat flip. And what do you think about an old baseball mind coming into that team that's probably isn't suited to deal with these personalities? I don't know what's your take on that?
Well, when we mentioned that speculation about Tony La Russa a couple episodes ago, I think that what I said was, were Casey Stengel and Connie Mack not available? And my opinion on that hasn't really changed all that much. To me, the White Sox area, Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner, is trying to atone for a previous mistake, getting rid of La Russa back in the 80s. And well, La Russa absolutely has the pedigree and the experience as a manager, mostly with the Cardinals. He can definitely, he knows what it takes to win championships. To me, bringing in a guy who's hasn't managed in 9 years, even though he has been in baseball in front office roles with Arizona and the Angels, to me, it just seems like a weird choice. The White Sox get rid of Rick Renteria to bring in an even older manager who hasn't been around the game as much, or at least in the same role in the last few seasons. I just think he's a very weird fit on a mostly young team.
Yeah, and this is weird. Rick Renteria is up for a Manager of the Year award in the American League, and it sort of reminds me of Dwayne Casey with the few years back where he was up there for an award, but he got canned. So it's really weird. I don't think Renteria was that. I think that was just talent sticking up in those scenarios because he definitely cost them a few wins. He kept batting Robert down in the 6 or 7. Then he kept hitting Mazzara. He platoon catchers. He was just a mess with that lineup, but they did get enough production there. One more thing before we transition to basketball. Alex Cora has a job again with the Red Sox. A lot of people didn't think that he would be back in baseball after what happened with his role with the Astros cheating scandal. Do you think it was the right move for the Red Sox or right move for the game of baseball to bring him back?
I mean, I wasn't surprised at all to see Cora go back to Boston. I've kind of been keeping an eye on that throughout the season. I don't want to get too into the debate of if it's the right thing to do from a moral standpoint. It's not my job to make those decisions, but Boston did have some success under Cora. We all knew the suspension wasn't going to last more than the one season. Yeah, it was not just him. AJ Hinch for Houston got right back into baseball, getting the Tigers role. I'm curious to see where Carlos Beltran gets his manager job. Basically, as a whole, with all the punishments from the Astros scandal, punishments is an interesting word there. But the managers and executives that were forced to take a year off, they're all getting their jobs back. So I'm not surprised by it at all. Boston definitely had a rough year without him. Obviously, not all Ron Renicke's fault who took his place, but I'm not surprised at all. Boston's got an interesting roster construction at the moment. They need a lot of help, especially with their pitching staff. Cora is more of a new school guy. When he was still there 2 seasons ago in 2019, and the Red Sox bottomed out, that he was very creative in using up to 17 pitchers on the roster once the roster's expanded. So he's going to at least be creative to get the most out of his team.
The bottom line is it comes down to the players with the cheating scandal. You can't put all the blame on the coaches, the front office, all that stuff. Sure, they played a role, but they're going to get their jobs back. Most people don't like, obviously, Cora and Beltran are the two main coaches that fans are going after right now, but it comes down to the players, all the players that were involved in that. So we're not going to spend too much time on that. It's now time for our NBA draft sort of breakdown that we're going to do. We're going to talk about draft choices, positional needs, available, all that stuff for the Bulls, Knicks, Nets, and then we also have our top 10 mock draft coming up. Swig, first we're going to start with the Bulls. I got the hat on, you got the Knicks hat, so that makes sense for today. Chicago Bulls, what's your gut feeling about number 4?
Right now, I'm thinking Denny Avdija from Israel is the Bulls' most likely target at number 4, especially if James Wiseman is off the board before then. And at this point, it's looking more and more likely that he will not last that long. So unless the Bulls make a trade up, which I think is unlikely considering their position as a team, I think Avdija is the most likely guy to go at number 4 for them right now.
I agree with you. I see him listed on a ton of mocks at number 4 with the Bulls, but I would be furious with that pick. I'm going to be straight up honest here. This is someone coming overseas. They see one player do it right. They see one player, Luka Doncic, who makes that impact as that big forward that can handle the ball, make plays. I don't think Avdija is that. He's more of a Nick Batum to me. He's not going to be someone that can go out and make plays right out of the gate. I think Obi Toppin's the best player you can take there. The top 4 I would go with Edwards, Wiseman, LaMelo Ball, and then Obi Toppin. Obi Toppin would be a nice fit. I just hope that they don't get rid of him. I hope they don't keep Markkanen around for an extra year and they pass on Toppin's talent, and just so that they can get Avdija there to play the 3 or the 4.
Well, to me, Avdija, he is a wing, and we've talked about how the Bulls need a wing on this roster. The only ones they really have are Otto Porter, who's overpaid and underperforming, and Chandler Hutchison, who I think actually is a slightly underrated piece that the Bulls could use. But you look at what they have at other positions. So at the moment, at guard, they have some talent with guys like Kobe White, Zach LaVine back there. And then, up front, there's Lauri Markkanen and Wendell Carter. So there's a clear need at the position. Avdija has his flaws as a player, but he absolutely has a decently high ceiling as well. This is a weak draft class, and he would absolutely come in. He's a playmaker who can space the floor and give guys like LaVine and White and possibly Markkanen more room to operate, especially now that they're free of Jim Boylan's system. So I don't think it would be a horrible pick. They'd be swinging for the fences. I understand that the whiff potential is very high there, but in a weak draft class, I don't think there's too many safe picks that the Bulls could really make at that point.
I guess you got a point there, but I'd almost rather have LaVine fall down to the 3, bring in another guard that can space the floor, have Kobe White play shooting guard. I think that makes a lot of sense here. But the thing with that, you'd have to have LaMelo Ball fall to your spot. And even if he is there, I don't know if they take him over Avdija. I would hope they do, because that's a guard play that they need. Because, Kobe White's a shooting point guard. He's not going to space the floor. He's not going to drive to the rim. It's not his style. He doesn't facilitate is the word I'm looking for. But I still think point guard is the biggest need on this team if you move White to shooting guard and have LaVine at the 3. I guess the bottom line is they're going to have to fill the 3 spot, whether it's shuffling someone around or drafting a guy like Avdija. But it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to see how they piece it all together, because there's a lot of there's pieces there that can help, but there's also some things that make you feel like they're a long ways away.
Well, the Bulls definitely need some all-around depth, but Kobe White is more of a combo guard, more of a scorer than a facilitator, and that's fine. You can play to his strengths. Overall, though, let's take a look at the Bulls' new general manager or front office, a president of basketball ops in their case, with Arturas Karnisovas, right? He's coming over from Denver, and he specializes, his background is in scouting international players. Obviously, he had a huge role in Denver drafting Nikola Jokic, for example. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that Karnisovas is going to have a close eye on Avdija, who's the top international prospect in the draft, with the possible exception of Killian Hayes from France. And we could talk about him being a fit as a point guard on that team. I would not be surprised to see him go very high in this draft. Now, Hayes in general, he can definitely score as well, but he's definitely more of a playmaker than Kobe White. So what would you do if the Bulls take him at number 4? You could definitely make that same argument that you could play White at the 2 and LaVine at the 3 with him. Do you think he would be a fit on that team?
I do. I like Killian Hayes a lot. He's one of my favorite prospects in this draft. I actually have him going to the Knicks. We'll get into that later on. That would be a great fit for the Knicks. Holy cow, getting a player like that. But you're right. That would be an absolute Arturas Karnisovas pick right there if they take Avdija, because, all his talent that he's done, he's a great scouter of the outside, and that would be – it just makes sense. That's probably why a lot of people are picking the Bulls to draft Avdija at number 4, because they're like, okay, you got to look at all the factors. Yes, he's a top 10 player. Yes, it's a positional need. And yes, that's something that Karnisovas does. He scouts international talent. Now, I will say this. He could scout him and not like him at all. And people would be like, okay, so he's good at scouting that talent. Maybe he's not the talent that they think that he'd be. So if they piece it all together, that could be a blown mock pick there, but you never know.
I'm very curious to see what happens. Just because Karnisovas is from a European background doesn't mean, of course, that he's going to go specifically for an international prospect. But considering the success he's had in Denver in the past with Jokic and a couple of other picks, he could absolutely go that route. Avdija at number 4 would not be a reach, and neither would Killian Hayes, I don't think. He definitely would be They are both very legitimate possibilities if they're still on the board at number 4. If you really wanted to get into it, you could possibly call LaMelo Ball an international prospect since he's been playing overseas as well. I don't know if I'd put him in that same category personally, but I am very curious to see how he and Karnisovas and Billy Donovan approach this draft. They have some interesting histories in terms of developing players, so it's going to be a very interesting but also very important pick for the Bulls to make for their long-term future. If they get a solid wing player or a solid point guard, all of a sudden they have a pretty talented core on the team.
What's the percent chance that they move up to the top 3?
I'm going to go with about 10%. I think the Bulls are a lot more likely to trade down to the later half of the top 10 or even the top 15 end of the lottery than they are to trade up.
I think that the percent for me is going to be 20%. Now that might be a lot. That might be a lot because, I mean, it's it's crazy because Golden State's been rumored to possibly move out of that 2 spot for a while now. I do think that they're going to stay put and take Wiseman if he's there. But if Wiseman goes 1, which wouldn't make a lot of sense, then you never know what could take place. I think they might do it, but it's still a long shot. I don't think you can blow up what they do have right now to go move up to in a weak draft to get someone in the top 4.
Nah, absolutely. It's just not worth the resources, and the Bulls still are more than one player away. So they are not in the position to trade away multiple assets to move up in the draft for a marginally better prospect. I think it would be wise for them to either stay where they are or trade down and stockpile more assets and draft picks to rebuild going forward. At this point, the draft is like lottery tickets. The more draft picks you have, the more likely you are to hit it big on somebody. I think the Knicks should follow a similar approach. We'll get into that shortly, but rebuilding teams that are more than one player away can't afford to be giving up multiple assets for one guy. It's just not going to accelerate the rebuild, and it's also going to prevent them from making more impactful picks going forward as well.
It would be wise, man. But anyway, we're at the 16-minute mark right here. We're going to transition to the New York Knicks. And I already mentioned Killian Hayes. I think Killian Hayes is a nice fit here. Maybe Devin Vassell if you want to stretch a little bit. But I think Killian Hayes will be a great fit for the Knicks if he's still on the board. You mentioned how he might go higher. What do you think of Killian Hayes and what the Knicks should do with that pick?
Well, I absolutely think he will be squarely on the Knicks' radar at number 8 if he is still on the board. He is that left-handed guy out of France, the point guard with the playmaking ability, a solid shooter, fantastic court vision. The Knicks have a lot of problems, and I've almost become numb to their existence at this point because I've sat through so much ineptitude on the court and in the front office, and I don't think that's an overnight fix either. The free agent talent is lacking this year. And even if it wasn't, the Knicks are not in the position where a star player is going to come to them, at least not yet. There are a couple pieces to build around, but like the Bulls, the Knicks also have new guys running the show. Leon Rose, a former player agent, is the new president of basketball operations for the Knicks, kind of following what the Warriors and the Lakers have done with Myers and Pelinka, a former agent. We'll see how he does. Tom Thibodeau, the new coach. The Knicks brought over Walt Perrin to be the head of college scouting from Utah. And Kenny Payne, the former Kentucky assistant under John Calipari, is an assistant under Thibodeau as well. Mostly, I think, to work with guys like Kevin Knox, who are from Kentucky originally. But if you look at just the roster, there are a lot of holes on the team. I think the 2 most obvious are at point guard and at small forward. And the Knicks have really needed a guy at point guard who can get to the basket and distribute for several years now. The point guards right now on the roster are Elfrid Payton, Dennis Smith, and Frank Ntilikina, none of whom can shoot or really get to the basket. So it allows defenses to not have to collapse the floor, so they're not going to be able to kick out to the shooters the Knicks have, which they don't have any. But if somebody is open on the wing, then they're not going to be open because these defenses don't have to collapse because there's no need to respect these guys driving to the basket, especially Ntilikina, who has some other strengths to his game, mostly on the defensive end. Killian Hayes could absolutely be a fit. It would bring in a second lefty guy along with RJ Barrett who can't use the right hand, but there would be some upside to that pick. Absolutely.
I think the pick has to be a point guard. We always talk about drafting for positional need or best available. I do think the pick has to be a point guard, and I do think a point guard would be the best available here. I mean, I think Devin Vassell would be a nice pick here too, because you have RJ Barrett, you're building around this team. He's a small forward. He plays shoots. You said left-handed. He plays the wing a little bit. And then you could bring in a point guard that's young too and build from those two positional standpoints and go up, similar to how the Thunder did it with Westbrook and Durant, the wing and the point guard, both facilitating going down the floor. I think that'd make a lot of sense for the Bulls or the Knicks.
Well, you could definitely use a guy like that as a point forward type of situation. Avdija could actually be used that way for the Bulls as well, handling the ball. But I agree that the Knicks are definitely going to need to take a point guard. If they go with a different option at number 8, if they don't make a trade, if they take a guy like Vassell or a Cora, I can at least understand it. I don't think either of them have super high ceilings. Cora especially not much of a shooter, for example. So both of them would come in. It would be more of an immediate impact on the defensive end of the court, which the Knicks definitely need a lot of help at. But that wouldn't solve their problems in terms of distributing or in transition. The Knicks don't play with enough pace for the most part. That's been true since Raymond Felton was around. The Knicks have mostly been content to be a slower half-court offense, and I really think that needs to change. I don't know if it will with Thibodeau's philosophy. I'm curious to see how he approaches this young team. But if the Knicks do not go point guard early on in the draft, the Knicks actually have 2 first-round picks. The team that usually trades them away like candy actually has 2 this year. They have number 27 in a trade with the Clippers for Marcus Morris. And if they do not go point guard at number 8, I think a big sleeper, if he is still on the board, would be Nico Mannion, a point guard out of Arizona. So I think he could absolutely come in and fill that point guard role. He has some ability in terms of getting to the basket, in terms of scoring and facilitating. So he, I think, will go a little bit earlier than that, somewhere in the 15 to 20 range. But if he is still on the board at 27, I think he would be a fantastic target for the Knicks.
I think Mannion would be a nice fit in Oklahoma City. You think about what they did with Westbrook. I know I brought that up last time I talked, but anyway, I thought that'd be a nice fit for them. You're right. The Knicks do have 2 first-round picks, but would it be too raw to say that Cole Anthony would be a stretch at 8?
I think he would be a little bit of a stretch, but I honestly would not hate the pick. In general, I still think the Knicks should trade down and accumulate another draft pick or 2 if they trade down with a team like Phoenix at number 10 or somebody later in the lottery, or even somewhere in the 15 to 18 range just outside the lottery. I have no problem taking Cole Anthony at any of those spots. He's a bit of a wild card in this draft. They could also look for a guy like Tyrese Maxey at that spot. There are a few different options for a point guard. They all have their different strengths, but none of them to me are head and shoulders above any of the others. That includes LaMelo Ball at the top. All of these guys have their very clear flaws and weaknesses to their games. I don't think any of their ceilings are super, super high. So I do not think the Knicks are in the position either. They are several pieces away. Last year, for the 2019 draft, you watch it on ESPN and they have the team needs on the board. And the Knicks, it literally said everything. And I don't disagree with that. I think that's still true. They still need help at almost every position, and they still need a lot of depth as well. So one way to help get some depth is to trade back, accumulate more picks to fill out the roster.
And we're going to go with the percentage of the Knicks moving into the top 3.
For God's sake. It scares me, but I'm going to go with about 40% here. Leon Rose, I don't think is afraid to trade up and make a move. I ultimately think they will stay where they are, but there have been the rumors flying the Knicks. If LaMelo Ball falls, especially past number 3, I think the Knicks are going to be looking to trade up at that point. Absolutely. And I think it is possible that Ball slips a little bit on the draft board, so I don't think it's out of the question at all.
It'd make more sense for them than the Bulls. Although the Bulls are closer up, the Knicks do have the draft capital with 2 firsts, and they have a lot more back there. Plus, it's hard because you look at the last few trades that moved into the top 3. You mentioned the Luka Doncic, Trae Young trade that resulted in Cam Reddish. I mean, there's a lot of big trades that when you move up, it's going to cost you a lot. And that's it for the Knicks. I think they have 2 first-round picks. Play it safe here and just ride into with what you have. I think it'd make a lot of sense for them to stay put, but you can't rule it out. I'd probably give them about 30%.
No, absolutely. Basically, I'm at the point where I'm just going to assume the Knicks are going to do something stupid until they don't. They have not earned the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, the most I've ever seen the Knicks do, yeah, being a fan for 23 years now, is win one playoff series in 2013. So you'll have to forgive me if my expectations of them are low. I think that's been deserved at this point. But similar to the Bulls' logic, they are more than one piece away from starting to contend or starting to be on an upward trajectory. So I do not think it would be wise for the Knicks to use the capital they have for once that they usually don't have and trade all of it for one guy. That would be putting a lot of eggs in one basket. And like we've kept reiterating, this is a weak draft class. I don't think there is that guy in this class that is worth trading up for.
Yeah, we're going to switch gears to the Nets real quick, and we're going to talk about them. They were our only playoff team we cover, so kudos to them for making a run. And it looks like most of their reinforcements this year is going to be with getting players back and potentially free agency if they can find a way to move some salary. But it doesn't hurt to have a draft pick here. It doesn't hurt at all. The first thing I want to talk about before we talk about positional needs, do you think there's a chance that this pick gets moved to where they don't even draft on draft night?
Yes, absolutely. I think there is a big chance. So right now, Brooklyn has number 19 in the first round and number 55 in the second round. And Brooklyn is in salary cap hell or luxury cap hell at the moment. They have a few very important decisions to make regarding the salary cap that limits their options in terms of free agency. But the Nets need to build around Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, right? And they also need to try to find a way to keep Joe Harris if at all possible. So one possibility I think that the Nets are going to look at hard is attaching number 19 to Taurean Prince, trading them away to get a little bit more cap space and giving them more room to re-sign Joe Harris without going quite as far into the luxury tax. I think the Nets' needs are more at this point around their depth rather than in the starting lineup. There's not a gaping hole there in comparison to what the Bulls and the Knicks have. So I think them attaching number 19 to a useful player and getting a little bit more flexibility is a strong option for the Nets.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because there's so much salary on this team. It's like the team is stuffed, and then there's nowhere to go. It's the most frustrating thing as a fan because you have to win now that everything is bottled up, and there's no room for error. Like you don't have any flexibility. The Cubs are in that same situation where they don't have enough money to sign anybody or move some pieces around. But from a player standpoint, I think you have to look at someone like an RJ Hampton, Patrick Williams, and maybe a Tyrese Maxey. Those are the three names that I'm sort of leaning with that pick. I'm not sure. What's your thoughts on those?
So when it comes to the Nets, I think the three targets you mentioned at number 19 are very solid options for them, especially if RJ Hampton is still on the board. When we're talking needs for this team, to me, outside of point guard insurance for Kyrie Irving, who, let's be realistic here, is going to get injured and miss time at some point. I believe if he gets through a full season healthy, yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. But even if he is on the court, let's be realistic here. Perimeter defense is a big need for this team, especially if the Nets do not retain Garrett Temple, who has a team option. They might opt to keep Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot instead, who is a cheaper alternative. But either way, they are going to need some help on the perimeter. Irving is not a defender. I think Karis LeVert is a solid defender, but not enough where it's going to upgrade their entire backcourt. Kyrie Irving is, to me, about half a step in front of Trae Young defensively. It's a big issue for him. So if they are able to get a guy like Tyrese Maxey, who I think has some defensive upside at number 19, he would make a lot of sense to me. Cole Anthony isn't quite as advanced on that end of the floor, but I think he could be a solid fit as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Anthony ends up falling to the later half of the first round, personally. I'm not saying he will, but if he is not taken in the 10 to 14 range, I think he will end up sliding to where the Nets are at number 19, because these teams just outside the lottery between 15 and 18, I think that's where they're going to start taking these swings on international players. We've seen teams do that to a lot of success with guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo going 15th in 2013, Rudy Gobert 27th in the same draft. International guys, you almost always see a hit or two later in the first round. And if teams start taking swings like that after the lottery, it's going to leave a couple of solid college players there for the Nets to take if they do, in fact, keep their first round pick.
Yeah, and Maxey and Anthony were the two big names in college basketball, especially in the ACC. And then you had, I mean, it was crazy how those two teams, Kentucky and Duke, of course, a lot of people look at them and the two big programs. They actually North Carolina, sorry, Kentucky, North Carolina, the two big programs in college basketball, and they were the star players. Anthony missed some time, but he looked good. You had Tyrese Maxey, who shined on opening day. If you remember the first game of the season with Kentucky, everyone's like, this guy's going to be the number one pick. But that was a little bit of a stretch right away. But like you mentioned, they do need defense on the perimeter right there. I mean, that'd be a solid fit to get someone like that. If they had any cap space, I thought they could make a move and maybe trading for a defensive mindset point guard, someone like Chris Dunn with the Bulls, or someone like Patrick Beverly, someone that can actually step in and play there. I thought that'd be a nice fit on that team. Obviously, Beverly's a big personality to bring into the room, but it would be interesting to see what they could do with that.
Beverly is what you call a pest, but he plays his role very well, has some strengths on the defensive end of the court, not a complete liability on the offensive end either, unlike Chris Dunn, who has proven to be a liability on that end. I'd say the Nets would be interested in Ntilikina, but he doesn't bring enough to where the Nets are right now, where he would be a real impact contributor. The Nets are, let's be realistic here. Unlike the Knicks and the Bulls, they have championship aspirations. The big key for them is obviously, how are Irving and Durant going to hold up? Are they going to be healthy? Or is Durant going to be what he was before the ruptured Achilles? Is Irving going to stay on the court for more than 30 games? If they do, how do they fit together? So the big questions are around their star players. They do have some decent options down low. I don't think their post defense is immaculate either. DeAndre Jordan and Jared Allen absolutely have some upside, but there's not a ton of shot blocking there at this point. They definitely have their moments. I think they could use just some defense all around is their biggest area of need, because we know what the Nets offense is going to center around. It's going to be Irving and Durant if they're healthy, and if they're not, it's going to be centered around Karis LeVert, and if Joe Harris is retained, Joe Harris. So they have some options who can score the basketball. What they're going to need is to bring in some depth and some complementary pieces, either in free agency through veterans minimum contracts or mid-level exceptions, or in less likely situation, the draft. I think there aren't many guys who could really plug and play. RJ Hampton might be the best option if he's still there at number 19, who could have a real impact on the offensive end of the court. What the Nets are really going to need, if they keep that pick, is to get somebody who can be some insurance for Kyrie Irving and also be an upgrade on the defensive end of the court. Because right now, with Steve Nash and Amare Stoudemire on the coaching staff, we know that they thrive in a fast tempo pick and roll style that they use successfully in Phoenix as players. So I think the Nets are going to be a more run and gun, showtime type of team. And we're going to see a lot of games with 130 to 125 type of final scores.
Speaking of former players getting jobs, Chauncey Billups ended up with the Los Angeles Clippers. I'm happy to see that. I'm a big Chauncey Billups guy, even though I'm a Bulls fan. The Pistons are always a great rivalry there. You had Richard Hamilton. He was a Bull for a little while. So I love that Pistons team a long time ago, actually. I'm getting old now. But anyway, Rick Hamilton, Ben Wallace, that team was fun to watch, regardless of rivalries and all that stuff. But anyway, Chauncey Billups has a job. Don't want to harp on that anymore. But the Nets, it's going to be tough, because I think they're a 44-win team, somewhere around that. I think Kevin Durant shows up this year, but I'm not sold on Kyrie Irving. I'm just not sold on him. I think he's an interesting player obviously he's an interesting player, but look, I don't know if he is what he once was. He's always banged up. It's going to be hard to get every single game out of him this year.
Absolutely. So the NBA, one piece of breaking news we could kind of talk about here within the last week is they agreed to a 72-game season that is cut this. Sorry. I'm just going to say it again. So if you look at the Nets, one piece of breaking news that we can kind of discuss here is the NBA did agree to a 72-game season that's going to start 3 days before Christmas. So I'm trying to adjust the win totals in my head a little bit since they're playing 10 less regular season games. If the Nets go 44-28, for example, that would definitely be enough to get them in the playoffs, most likely as a top 4 seed. But I do agree that Kyrie Irving is not a safe bet. I don't think his ceiling is super, super high where he's going to be able to carry the Nets all the way to the finals. finals. Now, there are a lot of question marks surrounding the other Eastern Conference contenders. Well, I'm very curious to see what happens with Milwaukee in particular. We'll see if Giannis does end up leaving after next season as a free agent, or how sustainable this core is, for example. I think Toronto's kind of reached their ceiling with their current core, but they're not a team to mess around with either. Overall, though, I don't think it's a safe bet for the Nets to say Irving and Durant are not only going to play a lot, but also going to play to the best of their ability at this point. They're definitely going to be careful with Durant's workload, in particular, missing all of last season. They're going to give him nights off here and there, which I think is reasonable. But at the same time, they need him to play enough where he can get back into the groove and start to develop chemistry with his teammates. The Nets have a very interesting roster. They can't really add much more to it unless they make a big trade with some of their depth pieces like a Jared Allen or a Karis LeVert. And that would be a very, very big risk to take if they're going to try to go for a third superstar, which I do think is on the radar for them. But who's available? So the Nets are in a tough spot here. They need to be aggressive with these established superstars on their team, but they also have limited financial and draft pick resources to do so. So I would understand if they keep the pick, but overall, I think they're going to be aggressive and try to upgrade their roster through trades rather than the draft.
Absolutely. And one more thing before we get into our top 10. What's your thoughts on the NBA and their sort of like not minutes restriction, of course, because that's due to injury or just something else. What's your thought on the night off and where you get the occasional day where they give a little weight management or whatever they call it?
I mean, I don't love it, but I understand it at the same time. These teams are basically, most of these teams that are clear contenders are basically playing warm-up games until the playoffs start. And the last thing that they need is for their best and most important player to get injured in the regular season. We've seen that a lot. Kawhi Leonard is the best example with both the Spurs and the Raptors in recent years, and even with the Clippers to a limited extent, is giving him days off just to make sure he does not get hurt before the playoffs, even though he doesn't have quite the same injury history as a guy like Kyrie Irving. But we all remember what happened with Leonard in the playoffs with the ankle injury and Zaza Pachulia being, accidentally stepping on his ankle. And we all know that no team wants that to happen to anybody in a meaningless regular season game, frankly. Some of these teams have the luxury of getting off to a nice start and then just kind of coasting into the playoffs. And Brooklyn, if they are able to keep their stars healthy, might be able to get themselves in that conversation due to the Eastern Conference being relatively weak. I'm not saying it's a strong possibility, but considering the wide open nature of the conference behind Milwaukee, you might be able to argue for a team like Miami or Toronto. Brooklyn might be in the position where they're going to be safely in the playoffs. And if they get to that point, I would completely understand them using that load management caseload, especially with Irving and Durant, two injury-prone players at this point in their careers. So I don't like it, but I understand it.
Yeah, I'm fine with it as long as it's due to injury relation. Like, obviously, if someone is like nursing something or if it's just something that's tight, sit them out. All these sports, going back, you have baseball. They have September call-ups. They start to ease off their players a little bit, coast into the playoffs. Football, you have week 17. If you clinch the playoff spot, coast into the playoffs. And there's a ton of sports that do this. I mean, hockey doesn't really do it because they just go out there and play. It's the best game in the world. But anyway, so basketball, I'm fine with it as long as it doesn't become like, oh, he has Wednesdays off. It's not a day off. It's okay. If you need a day, let me know. I'll give it to you. It's not like, if it's not injury related, just clear the air saying, okay, he's taking a day. He'll be back tomorrow. Simple as that. Not scheduled to where it works. I mean, I guess it worked for Kawhi, but anyway, that's my thoughts on it.
Well, I'm very curious to see what happens with the Nets in particular. Do they play any of these guys in back-to-back situations? We see that a lot with guys coming off of injuries, whether it's ranging from a guy like Joel Embiid or Kawhi, somebody that has missed a lot of time. They do that load management, don't give them the 30, 35 minutes on back-to-back nights. in general, though, I understand it. I really do. Well, when it's just rest, which we see for a guy like LeBron James a lot, it is moderately annoying from a fan's perspective because you want to see him play. But at the same time, there's no need for a team to risk a guy like LeBron or Giannis or whoever getting injured in a meaningless game. So they need to protect their interests for the playoffs if these teams are going after championships. And that means if they lose a couple extra regular season games to keep their stars healthy and ready to go for a grind in the playoffs, it's totally worth the trade-off.
I agree with you there. It makes a lot of sense. Just got to find a way to win basketball games. So here we go. Top 10 mock draft picks going at us right here. Swig, do you have yours ready? If so, we're going to start this 1 to 10. We got started with Minnesota, ends with Phoenix. This is going to be fun. Who's number 1 for you?
For me, I got Minnesota keeping the pick in this scenario. I do think both them and Golden State are very, very strong possibilities to trade out of those spots. But if Minnesota stays at number 1, I have them taking Anthony Edwards, the shooting guard out of Georgia. They have D'Angelo Russell at the point, Karl Anthony Towns down low, solid combination there. They need somebody that can fit in between. Edwards could kind of fill that Andrew Wiggins role now that he's at Golden State. But I kind of want to do a player comp here. I don't know what it is. I'm just not super high on Edwards, even though I have him going number 1. So to me, he reminds me of Dion Waiters more than anybody else in this draft. The ability to get hot and score, he has that size and strength combination, but horrible shot selection is basically what defines Dion Waiters' career, going back to Syracuse, and which has followed him in the NBA. So I could see that being kind of his career path. Hopefully he does not almost overdose on a team playing like Dion Waiters did, but that to me, that's who Minnesota would take if they keep that number 1 pick.
I'm right there with you. My number 1 pick is Anthony Edwards. I think it's pretty unanimous here, but I actually do think he's going to have a great NBA career. I think he can shoot it. He's a smart, or not, he's not smart. Anyway, he shoots the ball, and he's a solid scorer, and that's something you look for, especially high in the draft. You mentioned Wiggins. That's beautiful to have him slide right in. I love when pieces come together. It's one of my favorite things in sports. You have a facilitator like D'Angelo Russell who can score. You have the big down low, and then it all pieces together. And that transitions to my next pick, number 2, James Wiseman to the Golden State Warriors. They get their piece. You have Curry, you have Clay, you have Draymond, and boom, you get your big man in the center. It'd be like Klay Thompson going 1, Karl Anthony Towns going 2. Obviously, that's high praise. That's not what I'm trying to comp here. What I'm trying to say is the way it fits. The way it fits together is similar to how 1 and 2 is going to go here.
Absolutely. Really quick with Minnesota, one thing you do have to consider as well is their defense is already pretty suspect, and bringing in Anthony Edwards isn't going to make that any worse, but it's not going to make that any better either. To me, he's just kind of an average defender. He is the best player in this draft in terms of creating his own shot, creating his own offense, but his shot selection needs a lot of work. Moving on to Golden State, I also have James Wiseman being projected at number 2 here. I would be shocked if he falls any further at this point. He would make perfect sense for Golden State. The comp I want to make, he's a little tougher due to his unique skill set. The closest I could come up with in terms of current players would be Hassan Whiteside with a little bit more offense to his game. He has that active bounce as a rebounder. He has that impact defensively as a rim protector, but isn't at the moment much of a threat on the offensive end of the court, at least in terms of a shooter. He's more of a guy who can score around the basket. But looking at the Warriors, who really don't need the number 2 pick, we'll see how Klay Thompson comes off of his torn ACL injury, missing all of last season. Kind of similar situation to Brooklyn. But if you have Curry and Thompson and Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins on that team, your front court is mostly, your backcourt is mostly set. You need a front court guy to complement them. The Warriors don't have the same bench depth they had a couple of years ago either. So it wouldn't be a complete shock to me that they trade out of this pick and get numerous picks later in the round. But if they stay at number 2, I think Wiseman is a great fit.
Yep, and I'm going to switch to number 3 here. This might be the first curveball of the draft that we're doing here, but I think I'm going to go with Denny Avdija, going to the Charlotte Hornets. You look at this. They have 2 scoring point guards. Yes, they can move it. They got Devontae Graham. They have who's the other one I'm thinking of? I can't think.
Terry Rozier?
Yeah, Terry Rozier. They got 2 point guards that can score it. And you also you bring in Avdija here. I don't think LaMelo Ball's a fit for the Hornets. I mean, I guess he could, but we both mentioned how he might fall in the draft a little bit. I think Avdija would come in and fit that role very well for them. You have centers galore there. You also have point guards. It's a clogged mess in Charlotte. And I think just to unclog it a little bit, you got to bring in Avdija. If they want to go best available, maybe it's Ball. But I think, like you said, take the big swing and a miss here. I mean, you might miss, you might hit a home run. But anyway, I think Avdija would be a nice fit in Charlotte.
Well, Charlotte has a history of making poor choices in the draft. That can go back to Kwame Brown. Yeah, I'm thinking of Michael Jordan here. He has had a history of making bad choices. Going back to Kwame Brown with the Wizards back in 2001, that has followed him into Charlotte with guys who have not done a ton for the team, with Michael Kidd-Gilchrist or Frank Kaminsky or Noah Vonleh just not fulfilling the needs. So I have a curveball here as well, but it's not Avdija. I do think if LaMelo Ball is still on the board at this point, Charlotte could trade out of this pick. But if they stay at number 3 and it does go Edwards and Wiseman 1 and 2, I have Charlotte taking Onyeka Okongwu from USC. They are absolutely going to be looking at a center position as well. They need help pretty much everywhere. I know that Charlotte likes Wiseman a lot, but if he's not there, knowing Charlotte's draft history, I would not be surprised if they go Okongwu instead. He's kind of rising up these draft boards. We know that Okongwu actually does have some post-scoring ability and can also impact the floor defensively, so he could definitely slide in, make an immediate impact for this team. Is he perfect? No, and would it be a slight reach at 3? I think that's debatable, but he is the best center prospect in the draft behind Wiseman, and Charlotte is not afraid to kind of go for positional need. We've seen that in the past with them. The comp that I want to make for him, to me right now, is a lesser version of Bam Adebayo. And we see how important he can be for that Miami Heat team, especially on defense. So if you can get a guy like Devontae Graham and Terry Rozier at least handling some of the scoring load, I think Okongwu would be a nice compliment to them down low.
I like that comp. It makes a lot of sense. We both differ on this pick, and the media has most of them, or at least some of them, have LaMelo Ball here, but we both went with 2 completely different picks here. Anyway, the Chicago Bulls are now on the clock at number 4, and the Chicago Bulls select LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball here.
Interesting. Now, he would be a very interesting fit for Chicago. I personally have Avdija in this spot. I know I kind of hinted at that up top when we were in that Bulls segment, but if Avdija is still on the board, I personally would be surprised if he is not the pick. LaMelo Ball, his passing ability would be a nice compliment to Colby White as more of a scorer in that backcourt. But LaMelo Ball's defense is not exactly a strength either. So some of the same flaws on that Bulls team would be there. I'm going to keep saying it. The more LaMelo Ball falls in the draft, the more likely somebody trades up to get him, whether it's at number 3, number 4, number 5, etc. I do not. If the Bulls stay at number 4, I just don't see him being the pick personally. Their bigger need is on the wing. I see Avdija there, and I actually was going to make Nicholas Batum my player comp for Avdija. I think he's a great comparison. Avdija has the upside to be a shooter later in his career, but right now that's a big question mark for him. However, he is somebody who can space the floor a little bit and is a good playmaker. So he might be somebody that could learn under Otto Porter a little bit and get groomed into eventually taking a bigger role.
And if Lauri Markkanen learns how to shoot the basketball again, that'd be nice to get him some looks in the corner with him passing the ball to him. But it appears he forgot how to shoot and he forgot how to stay healthy. But we're going to transition to number 5, Cleveland Cavaliers. My pick here is Obi Toppin. You have Dayton, Ohio. This is overblown big time. LeBron was an Ohio kid, and he went to Cleveland. So let's have another forward from Ohio go to the Cavaliers. I'd be stoked to see this happen.
Obi Toppin would be an interesting pick, but I have Cleveland going a different direction here. I have them taking Devin Vassell from Florida State, the forward. We all know that Cleveland needs a lot of help basically everywhere on this team, and they have no defense outside of arguably Andre Drummond, who's only going to be there for one more season anyway. I think Vassell would slide in nicely as a 3-and-D type of player. The comp I have for him is Robert Covington. He gives me a lot of athletic vibes in terms of he's going to be very impactful on the defensive end of the court right away, and he can eventually develop that 3-point shot where he can be a weapon. basically Cleveland has two ball dominant guards in Colin Sexton and Darius Garland. They need to get players on this team that can complement them in terms of playing perimeter and post defense, which neither of them are capable of doing on the perimeter. Vassell can help kind of clean up some of their defensive deficiencies. And since Sexton and Garland are at least capable of driving and getting into the lane, finishing at the basket, making the defenses collapse, I think Vassell is the guy that can stand out there and make some open threes. So I think he would be a solid fit with a decently high ceiling at this point in the draft.
I like that pick. It's. I think it's a stretch though. I had him outside the top 10, but I mean, you'd be taking positional need here to complement what you have on your roster. It wouldn't be best available, but that still makes a lot of sense with that pick there. Atlanta Hawks, I have them taking someone that was high up in the draft boards a few months ago, I would say, and that pick's going to be Tyrese Halliburton.
Absolutely. I love that pick for Atlanta. I think he does eventually end up there. His strengths kind of complement Trae Young, who has been an electrifying playmaker on the offensive end. Halliburton is a solid complement, but I kind of cheated here. So at this point, I couldn't see LaMelo Ball falling any further in the draft. I still haven't projected him, but I don't see him going to Atlanta. So I projected a trade right here where the Washington Wizards trade up from number 9 and take LaMelo Ball at number 6. I think there is a lot of sense in that pick for the Wizards. They wouldn't have to move up or give up all that much to move up 3 spots in this draft. And John Wall is not going to be the long-term solution in Washington anymore, unfortunately. I think LaMelo Ball would be a fantastic fit for that team. LaMelo Ball and Bradley Beal in the same backcourt would be a very interesting combination. Well, it would still leave a lot of question marks for the Wizards, who are in a bit of a salary cap bind as well, being stuck with Wall's contract for a couple more years. I think they absolutely have the capital to move up and pull this off. I couldn't see LaMelo Ball falling any further in the draft than number 6.
Yeah, I like that. I love that trade. It'd be nice. I have him I had Halliburton sort of comparing to a better version of Kent Bazemore, who they tried a few years ago. Now, with the Wizards, that would be phenomenal. You bring him in. I don't know where it leaves John Wall, though. He'd be a bench player, which would have to take a new role there. But as a fan favorite for so long, John Wall making that much money on your bench, it'd be rough. But, hey, you're looking towards the future here. You don't have enough salary cap to go sign someone, so it makes a lot of sense for them to jump up and take that pick.
Definitely think it would be an interesting fit. The comp I want to make for Lonzo Ball is Jason Williams, the guy who going back to mostly his days in Sacramento, making these incredibly flashy passes, is a little bit more inconsistent in terms of scoring the ball, and his defense leaves a little bit to be desired. But we all know what LaMelo Ball is capable of as a playmaker, and his court vision is outstanding. There are some good attributes for him. I'm not entirely sold on him being a really impactful guy outside of his facilitating ability, but that Jason Williams, we know what his biggest strengths were. That's where Lonzo Ball gives me that comparison.
Now we have the Detroit Pistons on the clock, and I wanted to go Killian Hayes here, but I didn't. I'm going to go with Onyeka Okongwu.
Yeah, well, the Pistons absolutely need some center help after getting rid of Andre Drummond, but this is a rebuilding team that still is in the process of tearing down the roster. The Pistons are a long way away from relevancy. It's a fall far from grace from where they were about 15 years ago. I think they could go pretty much any direction here. I eventually settled on them taking Isaac Okoro, the forward out of Auburn. I wouldn't honestly love that pick for them. To me, Okoro is more of a high floor prospect instead of a super high ceiling one. Okoro is going to come in right away and be impactful on defense, similar to Vassell. But unlike Vassell, he does not have that same 3-point threat at the moment. I just don't see him being much of a threat on the offensive end of the court, especially at the beginning of his career. The comp I still see for him long-term, though, is Gerald Wallace, as somebody with, a great athlete who can make an impact on both ends of the court. But Detroit needs a point guard. They don't have Reggie Jackson anymore. And even if they did, I'd still argue they need a point guard. They've needed one for a while. Killian Hayes is still on the board, so I think they're going to strongly consider him. But at the end of the day, I think they're going to go for somebody that can improve their defense, and they need a lot of help on that end of the court. They need a foundational piece who is a safe bet to be there for several years, and I think Okoro is the most likely to fill that role.
Yeah, I love that pick. I thought about picking him there too. The point guard has been a need for them for a long time. I mean, going back ages. It's probably been since Chauncey Billups since they've had good guard play. It's been a long time. Anyway, we're going to switch gears over to the New York Nets. Not Nets, Knicks. We got the Knicks on the clock at number 8. I have them taking, I mentioned it from the very start, Killian Hayes. If he's available, that would be a phenomenal fit for the New York Knicks.
I also have Killian Hayes going in this spot. I think the Knicks are not going to be afraid to draft another French point guard, despite the mixed results of Frank Ntilikina from 3 drafts ago. The Knicks made that pick number 8 in 2017. They're making it number 8 here in 2020 as well. Another left-handed player for the Knicks at this point to complement RJ Barrett. And I am left-handed personally, so I'm always going to root for players like that. The comp I have for Hayes, due to his scoring ability and passing, is D'Angelo Russell. I think is the closest comparison. I'm not saying he has that same fluidity on the offensive end of the court, but I think there is the upside there. If you're looking at the Knicks, he's finally a point guard who can score and get to the basket. I do think the left-hand dominance, similar to RJ Barrett, is going to be an issue for him, especially when he enters the NBA. And I think he's a bit of a limited athlete, but if you can have him and RJ Barrett in the backcourt, there is absolutely some potential there. And I think Hayes would be a decent fit defensively as well under Tom Thibodeau's coaching style.
Now, I like the comp there. You had D'Angelo Russell, both left-handed. That was nice. Is there any chance the Bulls would reach at 4 for Killian Hayes?
I think there is. I don't think it would be a big reach either. We mentioned the Bulls' needs at point guard. Hayes is high on a lot of teams' draft boards. I think number 8 is his floor. I don't think he falls any further than the Knicks if he has not been scooped up at that point. But we mentioned Karnisovas's affinity for taking international prospects due to his own background and the fact that he had success doing so with Jokic in Denver in the second round. So I do think it's possible that Hayes goes as high as number 4 to the Bulls.
Yeah, that'd be sweet because Karnisovas having that international thing. We've been talking about that for a little while. We have number 9, Washington Wizards are on the clock now. This is another curveball for me. Cole Anthony sneaks into the top 10 here.
Ooh, very interesting. Now, this is where I made the trade a couple picks ago, so I have Atlanta moving back to this spot, and this is where I have them taking Tyrese Haliburton. So I agree on the fit, but I think he's just going to end up falling due to circumstances. Haliburton, to me, would be a perfect fit in Atlanta. They need a complement to Trae Young as somebody who can help on the defensive end. Haliburton's not an elite defensive prospect by any means, but his strengths kind of complement what Trae Young can do in that backcourt. They have some interesting pieces as well with Clint Capella on that team now, and Cam Reddish and DeAndre Hunter. So there are some interesting pieces. I think Haliburton would fit in well with his playmaking ability and the vision he has. And in terms of his shooting upside, I think is a little limited. They have Trae Young for that. So I think that Atlanta doesn't need to bring in a big shooter. The comp I have for Haliburton is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Ooh, I like that comp as well. Now, number 10, this is our last pick of the draft and last one of the episode. The Phoenix Suns are at number 10. And I think this is a huge positional need for them. This would actually fill a spot. I got Saddiq Bey from Villanova.
Ooh, I like him a lot. I think he's kind of one of my sleepers as a two-way player at the end of the lottery. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go high. The reason I projected Vassell so high is because of his really high ceiling. I think somebody's going to end up taking him. It might not be at number 5, but if a team like Washington or Phoenix goes for him at the end of the top 10. But for me, it's amazing I've gotten this far. I have Obi Toppin going to Phoenix at number 10. If he falls this far, I think he would be a really interesting fit at number 10. I haven't mentioned him yet. You have Devin Booker and on this team, right? Yeah, you need somebody down low that can complement him. And imagine what Booker and Toppin can do offensively. Toppin is a little unique in terms of he's 22. He's one of the older prospects in this draft, but his combination of athleticism, shooting ability, and bounce, he is going to be a very fun player to watch. But his deficiencies on the defensive end of the court are a major problem. Might be the worst pick and roll defender I've seen in recent years coming out of the draft, but he does have some very clear strengths. I know this is a bit of an interesting one, but to me, the comp is Amar'e Stoudemire. He was fantastic in the pick and roll on the offensive end of the court and was an extremely explosive athlete before the knee injuries started to catch up to him. But his defensive deficiencies were very well documented in Phoenix and with the Knicks in his career. I think Obi Toppin would be a similar style of player in terms of his strength strengths and weaknesses, and I think he'd fit in very well on that Phoenix team.
Yeah, I'd be shocked to see him fall to 10, but there is the raw factor with him about being exposed at some place like Dayton. It's just it's tough, but I think I'm still going to lead with the Cleveland Cavaliers here. But that's going to wrap it up for us today. Our poll question will be out on Twitter. Question of the week: which team is most likely to move into the top 3? Bulls, Knicks, Nets, or who is most likely to trade the first round pick? So feel free to answer that. Big City Sports PD on Twitter, Big City Sports Podcast. We're co-hosts here, Dylan Kearns, Swig, and this will be fun. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Click the subscribe button. We'll see you next time. Comment, let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time.